Hello and a very warm welcome to Microsoft Presents ETStudios Security Strokes in association with ETCISO. I'm your host, Divina Lasson. And on this episode, we're going to explore a critical topic, Repel versus Recover. What should CISOs prioritize? While it's ideal for organizations to be able to repel any cyber attack by preventing intrusion, the current threat landscape makes it increasingly hard to maintain a 100% secure perimeter. A Microsoft report shows that 74% of organizations experience at least one data security incident with their business data exposed. So, to take us through the role of CISOs in navigating these uncertain times, it's my pleasure to welcome our guest today, Sanjeev Singh, CISO and DPO Birlasoft India Limited, Hitesh Mulani, VP and Group CISO Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, and Emmanuel Silenzo, Cybersecurity Leader, Microsoft Asia. Gentlemen, welcome to ET Studios. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, we're here to talk about cyber resilience. And to kickstart, it would be great to get each of your comments on why you think cyber resilience is such a hot topic for CISOs today, and how does it really differ from cybersecurity? Maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So, in my understanding, cyber resilience is part of cybersecurity or an extension of cybersecurity. And the reason being, traditionally, attackers had been attacking us based on confidentiality of data. But of late, if you've seen, especially since ransomwares came into being, they attack the availability of our services, of our data, etc. Right? And this is where, in my understanding, resilience comes to the fore because that addresses the availability aspect of our services, our data, our infrastructure, etc. So it's not a separate thing, but cyber resilience, I would say, would be a part of
A part
the
of-
overall cybersecurity
All right.
program.
All right, wonderful. Hitesh?
So I think traditionally also, if you look at the model, it's always been identify, protect, detect, and
Yes,
respond,
yes.
right? I think for a very long time, respond was just a backup solution and a DR strategy,
Yes,
right?
sure.
Some got it right, some didn't. They kept stress testing it and all of that. But that was a once in 6 months kind of activity. It was a checkbox kind of activity. There were few companies which were serious about it. Some weren't. The ones in their right mind were, and that was deemed enough on the
Yes.
response side. Everyone kept spending their money on identify, detect, or identify, protect, and detect. And we were in fact doing this stat analysis, and if you look up to about 2014-15, our spends were about 70 to 80% on identify, protect, detect, but hardly about 20 to 30% on respond. With the advent of ransomware, what's happened is that it's actually flipped the entire thing total. You've now spent enough on identify, protect, detect. You have those controls in place. They're
Yep.
working well. But what if a ransomware actor was to attack you, right? And I think that's where the spends have shifted. You're talking about bringing in, immutable backups and terms like that. Every backup company is now claiming that I can do immutable backups, which is basically saying that your backups won't get corrupted
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Even if you're hit by ransomware, because what we've all realized is that if you get hit by ransomware, forget about recovery, right? If you do not have a clean backup,
Yes. Yes.
you are either going to unethically pay the threat actor, right? And he or whoever is at the other end, the organization isn't going to give you 100% back.
Yep.
Some of those keys sometimes work, some of those keys don't work,
Yep.
and your best databases might go away forever. And hence, it becomes that much more important. Resiliency becomes that much more important in today's day and age, given the nature of the incidents that are now perpetrating.
Yep. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Manuel?
I think the reputational damage that can be done because you don't have the right processes in place in that point during an incident is critical for the ongoing, profitability of the organisation or the operation of the organisation, depending on whether it's a public sector or a commercial account.
Yep.
Recovery and making sure that they have the right processes in place is, one of the most important things now, more so than the old adage that,
Yeah.
it's okay. We've protected the perimeter. It's actually now how quickly we can respond and recover when these incidents will occur, because they do occur. So from that perspective, I think that's why it's become such a huge element from a investor of an organization. You want to be sure that this organization can quickly respond and then resume their business operations very quickly. So.
So,
And if you could add one point to what my co-panelist was saying. So while he did talk about resilience from a recover perspective, what I feel is resilience goes slightly more left, right? Even for the identify, detect, and protect, uh, you have to build how resilient are you to the attack, also, right? As compared to how do you recover
yeah.
after the attack. So I think resilience covers the entire spectrum
Yeah.
of this chain.
Right. So, keeping that in mind, would you say there's sort of a balance that CISOs need to maintain? Of course, you said resiliency is part of cybersecurity, no doubt. But is there a balance in the prioritization and the various aspects of the role as well for CISOs?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. One of the core interests or motivations for us is to keep away the attackers, right? And how do you do that? By building in sufficient controls, processes, technologies, etc., so that the cost of attack for the attackers is high enough so that they do not target you,
Yeah.
right? As CISOs, we would want to avoid being targets of opportunities. We are okay if we are like, we are absolutely targeted. I mean, there's not much you can do much about it if somebody does come after
Yeah.
you. But if somebody is just scanning, say, vulnerabilities in the environment or looking for weaknesses in the product, that is where you start building the resiliency. Is to start closing those doors and windows and make it difficult for the attacker to get into your environment. If they do get in, that is where the second aspect of resiliency comes in, right? Do I have the capability to either stop them, or if not, recover from whatever damage has already been
Yeah.
caused? So absolutely, I think across this attack chain, the budgets are limited. The prioritization is very, very important.
Absolutely.
Where do you invest?
Yes.
The
Yes.
earlier in the attack chain you invest, the cost of recovery is lesser. The speed of recovery is faster. If the attack has happened and then we are thinking of recovery, then of course the cost of recovery also is high. The time of recovery is high, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hitesh, your perspective on the investment aspect as well. What kind of investments really are organizations looking at when it comes to prevention, of course, rather than response?
So, I've been a very strong proponent of the fact that uh, people need to maintain IT hygiene. IT hygiene is a very large part of security. I would go on as much to say that if using the existing IT components themselves, which are your machines, your servers, and the hardening of all of those, the patching of all of those, if those were the application development cycle, not the applications not having vulnerabilities, these are all IT components, right? They're not necessarily seen as security, additional security spends,
Yeah.
right? I think if this hygiene is put into practice, right, I, I would believe that about 50% of the controls sit right there,
Yeah.
right? And then comes the part of, the added onion layers of security that we build as an overall shell to protect the company. And I agree that, if we get those base components right, if we get the early part of the journey right, we're far more resilient to any attacker, penetrating your environment,
Absolutely.
right? And when we're talking about that, we're talking about controls that were there even 10 years ago. It's just about doing it right. Backups were there even 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
It's just about doing it right,
Yes.
doing it in the best way possible. And that's all part of IT hygiene. It then becomes security because there's a security angle to it. But backups were always part of IT hygiene.
Absolutely, of course.
So that's the term I like to use in terms of IT hygiene, because then it puts the responsibility of that back onto the CIO as well.
Yes.
It's not just a CISO problem,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I think that's important. I think the collaboration there, the understanding of both of these leaders as co-actors in this entire journey towards strengthening an organization, I think is a very important bond, which goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. So keeping it, yep, please.
Add into that there's also a false sense of security in backups, because sometimes the malware could have been resident there for 200 odd
Yep.
days more. So how far back do we go? And so we have to have other mechanisms as well.
Yeah.
So.
That's my favorite topic, by the way, because it's easy to say we'll restore from backup, but which backup?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
the attacker was sitting
Yeah.
for 60 days and you restore the latest backup, it's already infected.
Yep.
You're restoring a bad data, right? So you got to do your root cause analysis, find out when was the attack started, and then
Exactly,
you
yes.
restore the backup just previous to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So keeping all this in mind, would you say that the conventional security measures are adequate to meet up with the requirements of resiliency these days?
That's a loaded question. uh, I would say it depends upon the practice and the processes that you set up. The technology exists, absolutely. But where does it fit into the overall scheme of things for your own enterprise? That is something that has to be seen
Yeah.
as.
Yeah.
And resiliency is a program. It's not a technology. It's not a single process, right? It has to go through the attack, the entire attack kill chain, so to say, or the entire IT infrastructure or security
Of
infrastructure that we
course.
have. Everything we do should have resiliency, right? Starting from very basic availability, disaster recovery. Do you put one big server, or maybe you put scaled servers where it can automatically scale, etc., etc. So you start building it at design itself,
Yep.
and so yes, it exists. But again, how do you adopt it,
How to
and
adopt
where do
it.
you adopt it?
Absolutely. And what about some of the metrics of assessment when it comes to resiliency? And does this differ from what you would term as cybersecurity?
I think one of the new things that we've started doing is calling in professionals and getting ransomware,
Okay.
right? So they do an external attack breach assessment. If they don't get through, we then give them access and they say, assume you've breached the perimeter. Now, as an internal user, see how you can
Yes.
traverse the network,
Yes. Yes.
go as far as the backups, if you can corrupt the backups. And these guys are professionals who come in with tools. They are people who are on the dark net,
Yep.
right? There are agencies like that available. So I think a year and a half ago is when we decided we will start this practice of, at least once a year, a surprise attack. No one in the
Sure.
system except me and my bosses know that it's going to happen.
Okay. Okay.
It happens completely silent. Even my team has no idea it's happening. The idea
Wow.
is for them to catch it and stop it.
Sure. Yep.
And it's happening across the group. And everybody, who goes on high alert, I smile. And if I know something's going through, I have sleepless nights because then there's work to be done.
Sure.
But I think that's a practice that everybody should indulge in. Every organization should take it up depending on their size and scale.
Absolutely.
Because the findings that come out of there are real gems.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
hidden
Yes.
configurations in
Yes,
corners of
yes.
the organization, which were just, it's just like you've turned a blind eye, or you've just missed one small configuration, and you realize that, oh my God, it. I had world class patching standards, and I did not have, let's say, my boot sequence initiated.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, as something as simple as that, and suddenly you realize I've just been caught with my pants down.
Yeah.
And it just throws you off.
Yeah.
Right, as a senior leader, because and all of this doesn't get caught in normal audits.
Sure. Yeah.
Right, they just see you have these amazing practices, ISO 27001, and all the other VAPT and all of that they do, but this is one little thing in the corner
Yes.
that you don't catch.
Yes.
So yeah, it's quite amazing.
Great. Great example. Sanjeev, any specific metrics that you have as well for measuring resiliency?
So we do have few. At tactical level, we look at availability primarily, but at a more strategic level, we look at exposure scores for our environment, and we're starting to deploy something called CTEMS, Continuous Threat and Exposure Management, which is to looking at the overall organization security posture and finding out weaknesses like what Ritesh was saying. Uh, there is always something that gets missed out. While you may close 99 out of 100 doors, there will be something. So, how do I identify that one door that is still open, and then try and see what best we
Yep.
can do to close them? So we do that exposure score for our organization, and we look at it and then work downwards from there
Sure.
to identify then where all those gaps still exist
Yep.
and how do we close that. But at tactical level, it's mostly from availability perspective, those kind of things. And from the recovery side, of course, then you have the backups, the RTOs and RPOs, which is for testing how fast you can recover and how far back you can recover your data from.
Yep.
So those
Okay.
metrics still works for
Right,
us.
wonderful. And Emmanuel, before we wrap up, from a business perspective, from your vantage point at Microsoft, how do you see and how would you advise businesses to really remain cost effective while keeping all the strategies required, whether it comes to measurement and, of course, the key technologies needed to be invested in for organizations? How do organizations keep it cost effective as well by keeping resiliency at the heart of the strategy?
Yeah, I think the takeaway from those comments is it's nearly impossible to be 100% right 100% of the time. So where do we prioritize our resources? What are the most important things, right, in terms of patching and making sure that these vulnerabilities are, they're up to date, that
Yep.
we're not leaving the front door open. And I can only recommend, the threat intelligence and, utilizing the secure score
Yeah.
to see, are we making progress in the right direction,
Sure,
and which
yeah.
things will have the greatest impact for positivity within the organization,
Yes.
rather than starting
Yes.
left to right.
Yes.
They're really the challenges that a CISO has to deal with today, because the budgets are constrained, the resources are constrained, the time is a challenge, and you only have to be wrong once, and they only have to be right
Yep.
once. And how do we minimize that opportunity? That's the critical success factor
Yep.
for a CISO today.
Wonderful. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on ETStudios. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was
very
a
much.
pleasure.
Thank you. All right, on that note, that's all we have for you on this edition of Microsoft Presents ETStudios Security Strokes in association with ETCISO. But do stay tuned and join us for more in-depth and insightful conversations. Until next time, many thanks for watching.